Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My talk is just going to focus on how women are adhering. Like the previous presenter, I think we sat near each other and decided not to put any p-values. I also eliminated the graphs. Just an overview. We all practice breastfeeding from in utero, from 6 weeks post-conception. We're practicing by sucking our thumbs. So it's a vital part of growth. And when we think about prevention of HIV, one of the key components has been the four-prong approach. And for prevention of HIV in general. And PMTCT forms a key element in the four-prong approach. And although breastfeeding forms a key component in PMTCT, when you come to look at monitoring and targets for PMTCT, breastfeeding doesn't really feature. Doesn't stand out in most monitoring tools that we have. But nonetheless, it is an important component. And in both HIV infected and exposed children, their growth is already affected. And if feeding is not done correctly, this is going to get only worse. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, do you want them just to be HIV free, or do you want them to survive and be healthy and free of HIV? Over the years, there's been a lot of recommendations which have come up. This is just a summary of key turning points in the recommendations for breastfeeding when it comes to HIV. And Tanzania has always been playing catch-up with the WHO recommendations, which has left a few gaps. It's been identified that there are knowledge gaps, even with the providers as well as the mothers themselves. And this brings about non-adherence to some of these recommendations. And as a result, we're seeing children, they are HIV free, but because of inappropriate feeding, they succumb to more morbidities. And it also brings about non-adherence even to ARTs at times, simply because of the mixed messages. With the current recommendations that we have for PMTCT, it is a very strong recommendation, but the WHO itself acknowledges that the quality of the evidence to support this recommendation is actually low. We often think that as a developing country and as a developing region, Africa is doing very well in terms of breastfeeding because it's the norm and it's part of our culture. But in reality, we're not hitting the targets. Tanzania, for instance, it's only 63% of the general population which is achieving exclusive breastfeeding. And for the HIV-infected population, it's only about 55% that's estimated to achieve this. So this brought about the question for us, how has all these evolutions of recommendations influenced women's decisions and women's choices of whether to adhere or not to adhere? And what are the other factors which are influencing the practice of breastfeeding? So from this, we're looking to do 3 different studies. One being a cross-sectional study, and the other will form a cohort. So in study 1, we just want to look at the knowledge of mothers regarding PMTCT. And this is driven by that, even though we try to teach women about breastfeeding, a lot of the knowledge that women have is from peer education. Mothers who have also gone through the same process, and they're more likely to believe them. But then these mothers who are giving them information probably went under different recommendations for breastfeeding because of the prevailing recommendations at the time. So we want to see what the mothers know and what are they teaching each other. And hopefully this will feed into the need for having peer educators, as some countries have already started doing. Our second study, which falls into the cohort, is looking at how women who are in the current PMTCT program are adhering to the initial 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding, and what drives them to succeed, or what challenges do they face that cause them to fail. And the third study is basically a continuation of the first study, because now the recommendation is to breastfeed for 1 year. How many are achieving the breastfeeding for 1 year? And how many are failing? And this brings to light that there is already talk of recommending breastfeeding for 2 years rather than 1 year. Now, if we're failing at 1 year, will we succeed at 2 years? And is it really worth it? So, my progress thus far, we've managed to recruit 130 women who are currently in PMTCT and on follow-up. And we're setting up to do the cross-sectional study of women who are attending PMTCT and who are in CTC. In terms of my other progress, I have managed to mentor 3 students, 2 of whom were recipients of Thrive small grants, and we're working on the 3 manuscripts. And we're also collaborating with a health economist to try and look at the cost of attending PMTCT and on these women with the increased number of clinic visits that they have to face. In terms of engagement, it is very, very rare, but actually pictures exist of me without a beard. This is amongst the very few. I was asked to speak at the annual general meeting of Tanzania Medical Students Association in November last year, and tell them about how to engage communities. So even the younger generation of scientists coming up are very interested in moving from the classroom and applying what they know to the communities that they come from and that surround them. So hopefully better things are to come. Thank you very much.